Richard Dawkins made his name with The Selfish Gene, the book that popularised the notion that genes are the key to evolution. He's also Britain's best-known atheist, author of books like The Blind Watchman and The God Delusion. Now he's written An Appetite for Wonder, a memoir. It's subtitled The Making of a Scientist, and it's the story of his life from his childhood in Africa to his mid-30s. We invited him here to our newsroom at Broadcasting House so we could meet the author. Richard Dawkins, you became a zoologist, and you come from a family of naturalists and botanists, people who wrote books about birds and plants, and you should, by rights, surely, by the sort of laws of inheritance, have been a bug collector as a child, but you weren't. You were a rather bookish boy.
I was a bit bookish. I mean, I made something of this in my memoir. Perhaps I made a little bit too much of it. I was possibly a bit of a disappointment to some members of my family because I wasn't quite the outdoor type that my empire-building, solar topi-wearing ancestors would have liked.
Now, you grew up in Africa. You spent the first 8 years of your life there, and it seems, by your account, to have been a very happy childhood. But there are a couple of occasions when you suggest you were rather gullible as a child, when adults, not to put too fine a point in it, told you lies. Now, they do that to all children, but you suggest it might be better if we were to encourage a sort of healthy scepticism in children. Surely that is to miss the point. The innocence of childhood, the magic of childhood, is something we should value.
Childish innocence is valuable. I mean, I get kicked around the room for suggesting that parents should instill a spirit of scepticism in their children. I honestly don't know what to think about that. I can see that the magic of childhood is valuable, but I think there's another magic in the scientific worldview, and I think that teaching a child to ask questions, to be sceptical, to be critical. If you take a trivial example, Father Christmas, I would never actually tell a child, there is no Father Christmas, but I would say to a child something like, well, let's just think about this. I mean, you know, how many chimneys are there in the world, and how long would it take to get round them, and just get the child to sort of ask questions for herself.
Now, when you were 8, you came back to England because your parents had inherited a farm and you were sent off to various boarding schools. There are photos of you as the archetypal 1950s schoolboy. One of those schools was Oundle, and there you were taught by a man called Johann Thomas. Now, a lot of successful people, when they're looking back at their lives, say there was one inspirational teacher who really set me on the path. Was Johann Thomas, in your case, that teacher? And if so, why? What did he do?
Yes, I think he is. I mean, I first encountered him, he first taught me biology, I suppose at the age of about 14, and he was inspirational in a sort of poetic sense. I mean, he was sort of waxing poetically enthusiastic about the living world, and that made a big impression on me. And then that was the beginning of my learning about biology. And then at the end, when I was sort of struggling to get into Oxford, he took me under his wing and had me for extra tuition, unpaid, I'm pretty sure. I mean, he was that kind of teacher. He believed in education in the proper sense, and I think he got me into Oxford, which was quite a feat, and I think Oxford was the making of me. So I do owe him an enormous debt of gratitude. Yes.
Now, you were a successful student at Oxford. You went on to become a graduate student, and in due course you became an academic. And one of the things you reproduce in the book is the typescript of one of your very first series of academic lectures, and in it you use the phrase, "Genes will be selfish," and one of your colleagues has written lovely stuff in the margin of the typescript. The interesting thing is, though, that you set that idea aside and went on to spend the next 10 years doing a very different kind of scientific work before you came back to the selfish gene idea. Why?
That's true, yes. I was immensely inspired by the ideas of actually W.D. Hamilton, who wrote a couple of very important papers in 1964, and I adopted the ideas of Hamilton in the lectures that I gave first at Oxford and then at Berkeley, California, and coined the phrase selfish gene, and based some of those lectures on the idea that the gene is the unit of natural selection. And I went on lecturing about it. I didn't drop it to that extent, but I didn't write about it until 10 years later.
One of the points you make in the book more than once is that you find it hard to square the behaviour of the young Dawkins with yourself as the mature Dawkins? Are they really the same person? And one obvious example is that, like a lot of teenagers at the age of 13 or 14, you were very religious, and that's obviously a very considerable contrast to the position that you hold now. When did that change, and why?
I wouldn't say that's hard to square, because I think that the kind of bookish interest that I have, I was interested in where the order and complexity of the living world come from. And before I had understood Darwinian evolution, it was natural to resort to a sort of religious explanation. So I think there's a kind of continuity there. I'm more puzzled about the kind of social relations of schoolboys, who can be so cruel. And although I don't think I was cruel myself, I didn't do anything to stop the bullying that I saw around me. And that I find hard to square with the way I would be now. I would be horrified, and I would hope that I would try to go in and fight about it. So that's one respect in which I think the child is not father of the man. But you ask specifically about religion. I mean, I lost my religion a little bit later, probably about the age of 16. But I think that there was a certain continuity there. I was interested in the same questions. I just came up with different answers.
I'm curious about what motivates Richard Dawkins today. You became the first professor of the public understanding of science at Oxford, which was a post you lobbied for very vigorously to be established. And you did that for, I think, 10 years or more. Now you have become associated in the public mind very much with this militant, almost aggressive, atheistic position. Are you content with the way that you're perceived?
I don't buy the word aggressive, actually. People who call me aggressive have often not actually read my books. They've often read what other people have said about what other people have said, what other people have said about my books. So there's a bit of propaganda there. The other point there about the apparently sounding aggressive is that we've all got so used to, over centuries, the idea that you don't criticize religion at all, that even a very mild criticism of religion, even a very gentle criticism of religion, is literally heard as though it was aggressive, when actually the language, if you actually look at the language, it's a lot less aggressive than you'll normally find in any sort of, I don't know, restaurant criticism or theatre criticism or book criticism. It's an exaggeration born of the almost universal presumption that you don't criticize religion because you just don't. It's not done.
Richard Dawkins, thank you very much indeed.